Signs were all there, I suppose. I just didn't want to see them. My son-in-law had been distant for months, distracted at Sunday dinners, quick to check his phone under the table when he thought no one was looking. My daughter Harriet kept telling me everything was fine, that he was just stressed about the new contract his firm had landed. She said it with that particular brightness in her voice that mothers recognize, the kind that means the opposite of what the words say. Harriet is 43. She looks like her father did at that age. Same dark eyes, same way of tilting her head when she's thinking hard about something. She married her husband, Kent, 11 years ago at a little venue outside Kelowna, and I remember standing at the back during the ceremony thinking he didn't deserve her. Not because he was a bad man. He wasn't. He was charming and capable, and said all the right things. I just knew, the way mothers sometimes do, that he would always love himself slightly more than he would ever love anyone else. I said nothing. You don't, do you? You smile and you dance at the wedding, and you tell yourself you're wrong. For 11 years, I told myself I was wrong. It was my neighbour, Paulette, who gave me the idea. We were having coffee at my kitchen table on a Thursday morning in October, one of those grey Vancouver Island mornings where the ocean and the sky are nearly the same colour, and I mentioned, in passing, that Kent's company was hosting their annual fundraising gala at the Fairmont in Victoria that Saturday. Harriet wasn't going. She'd been fighting a head cold all week, and Kent had told her it was better she rest. He said he'd represent them both. Paulette put down her mug and looked at me with that particular expression she has, eyebrows slightly raised, head cocked to one side. "And you believe that?" she said. I didn't answer. She knew someone who knew someone at the hotel's catering company. That's how things work in a small city. 2 phone calls later, Paulette had found out that the catering crew was still short-staffed for Saturday. They needed experienced servers for a 4-hour shift. No formal interview. Show up at 4. Black trousers, white shirt, non-slip shoes. I'm 67 years old. I spent 22 years working front of house at restaurants before I retired. I know how to carry 4 plates at once and smile while doing it. I told Harriet I was going to my friend Roberta's birthday dinner in Duncan. I drove myself to Victoria instead. I stood in the staff change room at the Fairmont at 4:15, adjusting the collar of my white shirt in the small mirror above the lockers. The woman next to me, young, maybe 25, was pulling her hair into a tight ponytail. She smiled at me in the mirror. I smiled back. My heart was going at a pace that had nothing to do with exertion. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Or maybe I did, and that's the part I can't quite bring myself to say even now. Maybe I was hoping to find nothing. Maybe I was hoping to walk out of that hotel at 9 o'clock with a sore back and the quiet, embarrassed relief of a woman who was wrong about everything. The ballroom on the hotel's 2nd floor had been dressed beautifully. Deep burgundy linens, tall centerpieces of white roses and dark greenery, candlelight on every table. The kind of event that costs more per plate than most people's grocery budget for a month. Ken's firm handled commercial real estate, large-scale development, the kind that reshapes whole neighborhoods, and the people in that room had money that showed in the particular way expensive money does, quietly, in the cut of a jacket, in the lack of any obvious logo. There were 200 guests, maybe more. I was one of 12 servers. My job was the east side of the room. 4 round tables of 10, plus a service station near the kitchen corridor, where I'd be plating and running appetizers through the first hour. I found Ken's table before he arrived. His name was on a place card near the center of the room, table 6. I made a point of not walking past it unnecessarily. I was there to observe, not to be seen. He came in at 6:15 with a group of colleagues, laughing at something one of the men had said, hand loosely in the pocket of his suit jacket. He looked relaxed. More relaxed than I had seen him in months, actually. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was the woman beside him. She was perhaps 35, slim, in a dark green dress, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing you look exactly right for the room you're in. She wasn't touching him. They weren't doing anything that could be called obvious. But there was something in the geometry of them, the way she leaned her head fractionally toward him when she laughed, the way he oriented himself toward her, even while speaking to someone else, that I recognized. I'm 67 years old, and I have been watching people my entire adult life. I knew what I was looking at. I told myself to stay calm. I filled water glasses. I carried plates of smoked salmon crostini and miniature beef Wellingtons and set them down at tables where no one looked at me at all. This is one of the particular invisibilities of service work. Once you're in uniform, you become part of the furniture. I had counted on this, and it held. Kent looked through me twice while I worked the table adjacent to his. Both times, not a flicker of recognition. Her name was Phoebe. I learned this within the first 20 minutes, from overhearing the introductions at Table 6. She was described as a project coordinator on the Ridgeline development, a large, mixed-use project that Kent's firm had been working on for the better part of 2 years. That much was plausible. That much could have meant nothing. But at 7:40, I was at my service station refilling a water pitcher when I heard her laugh, a short, bright, private kind of laugh, and I turned to see Kent lean down and say something very quietly near her ear. She turned her face up toward him. Their faces were perhaps 6 inches apart. He did not pull back. Neither did she. I set the pitcher down carefully. I breathed. I went back to work. The thing about carrying a tray of drinks across a crowded room is that it requires your hands and a portion of your attention, and whatever is left over goes somewhere you can't always control. Mine went to Harriet, to her voice on the phone 2 weeks ago, telling me that she and Kent were thinking about finally trying for a second child. She was 43, she knew the timing wasn't ideal, but Kent had said he wanted this, had said he was ready, had been so warm and certain about it that she'd started to let herself believe it too. I thought about my grandson, Owen, who is 8, and who has his mother's eyes and his father's way of walking into a room as though he owns it, which I've never found endearing in Kent, but find irresistible in Owen. I served 3 more tables. I refilled bread baskets. I cleared appetizer plates with a smile. The speeches began at 8:30. The company's managing partner, a broad-shouldered man named I gathered from the program on the nearest table, Roland, stood at the podium and talked about what a remarkable year it had been, about the Ridgeline project, about the team that had made it happen. He talked about leadership and vision, and the kind of future-forward thinking that their clients deserved. It was a polished speech. The room listened with the practiced attentiveness of people who have attended many such evenings. Then Roland smiled and said, "I also want to take a moment to recognize a personal milestone for one of our own. Kent. I think the whole office already knows, but the rest of you should too." I stopped moving. Phoebe and Kent have been the quiet backbone of the Ridgeline project for nearly 2 years, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, well. Roland raised his glass. "To the 2 of you, we wish you every happiness. When's the date?" The room applauded. There were a few knowing laughs. The sound of people in on a secret that had apparently not been particularly well kept. Kent reached over and took Phoebe's hand. She was smiling, that private smile again, and turned her face toward the room as though accepting something she had known was coming. I was holding a small stack of side plates. I became aware of this only because my hands were shaking slightly and the plates made a faint sound against each other. I set them down at the service station behind me and stood very still for a moment. Every happiness. When's the date? My daughter was at home in bed with a cold, believing her husband was representing their family at a work function. My daughter was talking about having another child with this man. My daughter had no idea that this room, 200 well-dressed people with their wine glasses raised, apparently did. I am not, by nature, an impulsive person. I spent my entire working life in situations where things could go wrong quickly, and the only useful response was to stay steady and think clearly. I can carry 4 plates and resolve a customer complaint and keep smiling, and the whole thing looks effortless, because it is, by now, simply how I'm built. But I stood at that service station and I thought about my daughter's voice. I thought about how she would find out. Because she would find out, these things always surface, and whether it would be in a year, or 2, or 5, and what the finding out would do to her by then. I thought about Owen. And then I thought she should not find out alone. I untied my server's apron, folded it, and set it on the service station. I walked to table 6. I am aware that what I did next was not the most measured response available to me. I have replayed it many times since, and I cannot entirely say I would do it differently. I stopped behind Kent's chair, and I said, in a perfectly normal voice, "Congratulations, Kent." He turned around. The moment he saw my face, the colour left his entirely. I watched it happen. "It is not a thing I will forget." "Mum," he started, and then stopped. The word hung there wrong in his mouth, something he'd reached for automatically and immediately regretted. The people nearest us had gone quiet. "I'm Harriet's mother," I said, for the benefit of anyone at the table who might not know. I said it clearly, without drama, the way you state a simple fact. "I've been working the room tonight. I didn't want to miss the speech." I looked at Phoebe. "I'm sure you're a perfectly lovely person. I hope you understand that what happens next has nothing to do with you and everything to do with my daughter." I took my phone from my trouser pocket and I called Harriet. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with her cold. "Mum, is everything okay? I need you to listen to me," I said. "I'm at the Fairmont in Victoria. I'm standing at your husband's table. I need to tell you some things. And I need to tell you now, while there are witnesses, because I want you to hear it clearly, and I want Kent to be present when you do." There was a silence on the line. "Mum," she said, very quietly. "I'm here," I said. "I'm right here." I told her what I had seen. I told her about the speech. I told her about Phoebe. I told her calmly, with Kent sitting 3 feet away from me, unable to leave his own table without making a scene in front of his colleagues, and his managing partner, who had not moved from his position near the podium and was watching all of this with an expression I can only describe as appalled. Harriet did not cry on the phone. She asked one question, which I will not repeat here because it was between the two of them, and Kent answered it. His voice, when he answered, was very small. "I said goodbye to my daughter. I told her I would be at house within 90 minutes. I told her not to be alone. I turned to Kent and I said, 'You should know that your son is exactly like her. He has her kindness. Don't undo that.' Then I walked back to the service station, picked up my apron, folded it properly, and brought it to the kitchen supervisor to return. I thanked her for the shift. I got my coat from the staff change room. I drove home along the Trans-Canada in the dark, the lights of other cars moving past me, the radio off. My hands were steady on the wheel. I was crying, but quietly in that way you do when you're sad about something that was already inevitable, when the grief isn't surprise exactly, but just the weight of a thing finally being named. Harriet called me when I was 20 minutes from her house. She had called her friend Sandra, who was coming over. She had put Owen to bed without telling him anything. She was, she said, strangely calm. "I think I've known for a while," she told me. "I know," I said. "There is a particular helplessness in watching your child absorb a blow that you could not prevent, even when they are grown, even when they are 43 and capable and have built a full life for themselves. They are still your child, and the impulse is still to stand between them and whatever is hurting them, even when that moment has already passed. What I could do was show up. I did that. The months since then have not been simple. Harriet is not a person who falls apart. She is too much her father's daughter for that. But she has had her nights. The paperwork in Canada takes time. There is no quick version of untangling 11 years. Kent moved out in November and into a rental in Burnaby. The Ridgeline project was completed. Phoebe, I understand, no longer works at the firm. I don't ask about her. It isn't relevant to anything that matters to me. Owen knows that his parents are separating. He has been told that sometimes adults stop being the right partners for each other, which is true if incomplete. He has his mother's resilience, and I am trying to believe that will be enough. I believe in him. I believe in him. I am 67 years old, and I have been a daughter, a wife, a mother, a widow, a waitress in a borrowed uniform in a hotel ballroom on a Saturday night, I have carried things the length of a room without breaking them. I have set them down carefully. There are things I would tell my younger self if I could. I would tell her that love is not always enough to make a person trustworthy. I would tell her that your instincts, even the ones you spend years talking yourself out of, are usually correct. I would tell her that showing up, physically, concretely, being present in the difficult room, is almost always the right thing to do. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I would tell her that the moment your child says, "I think I've known for a while," and you say, "I know," and there is nothing left to explain between you, that moment, as painful as it is also a kind of love, the kind that doesn't need to be performed or explained or dressed up in anything. The kind that simply holds. I keep coming back to the drive home, the Trans-Canada in the dark, other headlights passing, the radio off. My hands were steady. I was crying, but the quiet kind, not the kind that comes from shock, but from finally setting down something heavy you've been carrying for a long time without admitting how much it weighed. I've thought a lot about what made that night possible, not the logistics of it. The borrowed uniform, the catering shift, the fact that Paulette knows everyone in a 50-kilometre radius. I mean the internal part. What it actually takes to walk into a room like that and stay steady when everything you fear turns out to be true. I think it comes down to three things, and I didn't have words for them that night. I only recognized them afterward, in the quiet of the weeks that followed. The first is knowing what's right and choosing it even when it costs you something. I could have left that ballroom. I could have untied my apron, driven back to Duncan, and told myself it wasn't my place. Harriet was a grown woman. Maybe she already knew. Maybe it would sort itself out. Every one of those thoughts crossed my mind, and every one of them was a small exit I chose not to take. Not because I was righteous about it. I wasn't. I was frightened. But there is a difference between what's comfortable and what's right, and at 67 I've had enough practice to know which is which, even when I'd rather not. The second is thinking clearly when everything in you wants to react. When Roland raised that glass and the room applauded, I didn't move. I held a stack of side plates, and I breathed, and I thought about what Harriet actually needed, not what would feel satisfying for me in that moment. Not a scene, not a confrontation that served my anger. I thought about what would give her the clearest picture, the most solid ground, the least room for Kent to revise the story later. Calling her while he was still sitting there with witnesses was not an impulsive decision. It took everything I had to make it a calm one. The third is simply not leaving. Showing up at Harriet's door that night. Sitting with her while she absorbed it. Not offering solutions she hadn't asked for. Not filling the silence with reassurance that would have rung false. Just being present in the hard room, for as long as she needed. That kind of steadiness, the willingness to stay when staying is uncomfortable, is something I've had to build over a lifetime, and I don't think it ever stops being difficult. It just becomes more instinctive. Harriet is doing better now. Not finished. You're never finished with something like this, but steadier. Owen makes her laugh every day, which is the best medicine I know of that doesn't come in a bottle. She told me recently that what she remembers most about that night is not what I said to Kent, not the phone call, not any of it. What she remembers is my voice, that I sounded calm, that she knew from the first second that she was not alone in it. I think that's the only thing I want to be remembered for in the end. Not that I was clever or brave or right, just that when it mattered, I showed up. And I stayed.